Now we've seen some examples of the use of functions in SQL queries. SQL supports scalar functions and aggregate functions. Let's take a look. So we've seen some examples of scalar functions, like len. Len returns the length of a string. We say len is a scalar function. It takes a singular input value to produce the output, the count of the number of characters in the input string. So we say len is a scalar function. It takes a single input value, a scalar valued input. Left, the left function, is also a scalar function. It actually takes two input values, but each of the inputs are scalar valued. Each of the inputs is single valued. Let's just have a look at the use of those functions. So there we go. So the left function returns a string at the left hand end of the input string, and the number of characters is specified in the second argument. Now SQL also supports aggregate functions. An aggregate function is a function that takes a set of input values. So it's a set valued input. So here we're looking to display the minimum postcode value in the customer table and also the maximum postcode value in the customer table. Now, as you might expect, this query produces one output row because we're asking for the min and max values, min and max postcode values in the customer table. So I guess, yeah, we expect to see one minimum value and one maximum value. So that makes sense. But just notice that this query, of course, produces 6 output rows because there are 6 rows in the customer table. And we said that since this query has no where clause, the rows aren't being filtered. We said that each row would be passed across one at a time to the select clause to produce an output row, which is why we get 6 output rows. But something very different is happening here, because we're not producing an output row for each customer row. We're producing an output row for the complete set of customer rows. Something very different is happening. Now, let's have a look at this query. It's an interesting one. It shows the use of an aggregate function in a subquery. So here we're saying, give me the sales order number of those sales orders where the final price is equal to the maximum final price in the sales order table. Got an extra parenthesis there, we only need one closing parenthesis. So we'll just run that, and there we are. That's the sales order number that has the maximum, the largest final price value. Now just notice we could have used in here. It will produce the same result. But here we are in a position to use the test for equality. Why? Because we have a single value on the right that we're comparing with a single value on the left, which is being compared with a single value on the right. The right hand side, a subquery, is evaluating to a single value, which is why we can use the equality operator. Now, we have seen then that this query produces a single output row. There it is. And as you know, this query here, which is, I think it might be easier to do it this way, this query here produces more than one output row, produces a set of outputs. Given that mismatch, one output row, more than one output row, it's probably not surprising then that when we try and mix these two queries together, something weird happens. So we get an error message that says column SOID, sorry, sales order dot SOID, that's the column called SOID that came out of the sales order table, is invalid in the select list. It's saying I've got a problem with SOID appearing in the select clause here. Why? Because it is not contained in either an aggregate function or the group by clause. Ooh, mention of the group by clause here. That's interesting because our query doesn't have a group by clause. It does say that there's a problem because SOID is not in an aggregate function, and certainly if we were to include it in an aggregate function, we would get a result. SQL Server would be quite happy with that, but without it, there's a problem. It's something to do with this mismatch in the number of rows that we're trying to produce. But interesting also that the error message makes mention to the group by clause. Now every query that has a group by clause we describe as a grouped query. The interesting thing is that this is a grouped query, even though it doesn't have a group by clause. The message coming back from SQL Server is sort of assuming it's got a group by clause because it knows that it's dealing with a grouped query. Grouped queries. That's coming up next.